talked about it last week a little bit. The warring factions, there's two families. There's an aggressor family and ones that are not the aggressors. And they've been fighting, there's been shooting, there's been murder, killings between both sides. Turns out that I found out that there was a pastor, a native pastor in the aggressor family. There was a native pastor in the non-aggressor family. The two pastors got together and were able to work a ceasefire. And so they're also working on negotiating a permanent, so-called permanent ceasefire. But God's hand is in Papua New Guinea, working through a couple of pastors living out in the bush. So the runway is open up. They can fly in and out now. The compound is open. There's access and egress there. So things have been improved considerably. I asked him, I said, is it still precarious? He said, it's always precarious. He said, but it's not as precarious as normal, so, or as it has been. We're in Genesis chapter 7. Yeah, I also found out from him they're taking a vacation. Missionaries need a vacation too. So they're taking a vacation and they're going to go to Australia. And they're going to go to, well, it's close by. It sounds like it's pretty exotic, but it's actually south. So it's close by, and they're going to go to this place in Australia. They found out that there is a missionary family in Australia in a city called Cairns, and that missionary family owns a house there. And the missionary family is going back to the States for their holiday. And so Scott and his family, Scott and his wife and another missionary and his wife are going to go and take over this missionary's house and kind of house sit, so they get free lodging for their Christmas vacation. So God works in all kinds of different ways. So Genesis chapter 7, I want you to see something here that I ran into, and I don't know whether I'm on the right track or not, but I hope so. Genesis chapter 7, starting in verse 17. And the flood was 40 days upon the earth, and the waters increased and bare up the ark, and it was lifted up above the earth. 18, and the waters prevailed and were increased greatly upon the earth, and the ark went upon the face of the waters. Verse 19, the waters prevailed exceedingly upon the earth, and all the high hills were under the whole heaven were covered. 15 cubits upward did the waters prevail, and the mountains were covered, and all flesh died that moved upon the earth, both of fowl and of cattle and of beast, and of every creeping thing that creepeth upon the earth, and every man, all in whose nostrils was the breath of life, of all that was in the dry land died. And every living substance was destroyed, which was upon the face of the ground, both man and cattle and creeping things and fowl of the heaven, and they were destroyed from the earth. And Noah only remained alive, and they that were with him in the ark. And the waters prevailed upon the earth 150 days. Story of water, and I look at it as water rising, okay? The rains came and the waters started to rise. The Bible says that the windows of heaven were opened, water falling. The fountains of the deep were broken up, waters rising, so they were kind of getting from both sides, all right, and things were happening here. But I want you to see this. Verse 17, the waters increased. Verse 18, the waters prevailed. Verse 19, the waters prevailed exceedingly upon the earth. And then over to verse 24, the waters prevailed upon the earth 150 days. If you look at these words, and I looked them up in the Strong's Concordance, the first one is the waters increased. That word means to enlarge or to grow more abundant. The second one is prevailed, and that means to overwhelm or become mighty. The third word is increased greatly, and greatly means speedily or quickly or rapidly. And then the last time in verse 19, they prevailed exceedingly, which means vehemently. Notice a progression here. At least that's what I see. I see the waters are coming up and they're rising very quickly, and then they get more and more and more. It's an inundation, if you will. Anybody here ever been to the Chattahoochee River just below Beaufort Dam? There is a little sign there, if I'm not mistaken, that says, when the horn sounds, get out of Dodge. Okay?
And it means it.
And it means, you bet. It comes out exceedingly, it prevails. Okay? And this is kind of the thought process that I get here, is that Noah didn't have a horn, but he knew what was going to happen. And the waters start coming up a bunch. So this is no... There are always skeptics in life. No matter what happens, there's always people that are skeptics. There are always those that kind of go in their own direction, their own way. And there are a lot of skeptics that are out there, and they try to deny a flood, but they can't. There's so much evidence of a flood worldwide that the skeptics cannot deny a flood. So the best that they can do is they can downplay it by saying, well, it was only regional. It was only local. Hopefully we're going to prove through chapter 7 that it was not regional. It was not local. It was everywhere. So we're going to try to do that. And pray for me, because I need help in this regard. Okay. Progression. The waters prevailed exceedingly upon the earth. Number 19. All the high hills that were under the whole heaven were covered. This is all and whole are the same word in Hebrew. It's like Jesus saying verily, verily. You know, when Jesus says verily, verily, it means, whoa, you better pay attention. This one's like really important, okay? All the high hills and under the whole heaven, it's a double emphasis. And in Hebrew, that means pay attention, because what we're talking about is real serious here, okay? This is like the real thing. This is not some fairy tale or some myth or some legend, as some would have you to believe. Okay, double emphasis. Verse 20, 15 cubits upward did the waters prevail, and the mountains were covered. You remember the dimensions of the ark? Let's see if we can find them. It was 30 cubits high, okay? So 15 cubits is half of the height of the ark, okay? 15 cubits. This boat, and the big boat, was made out of wood, right? They didn't have steel, they didn't have iron, they didn't have whatever, so it was made out of wood. That tells me that it was heavy. Now get this ark, and inside this ark, I want you to put a bunch of animals and load those animals into that ark, okay? And then they got to eat, so load into it all the vegetation that they had to eat. This baby was a heavy boat. Now I don't know what y'all know about boats. I was brought up pretty much in boats, and boats have something called a draft, or a draught. And that thing, being 30 cubits high, had to sink at least 15 cubits in the water. It had to draw 15 cubits of water. Why is that important? We're going to find later it landed on the top of Mount Ararat. Mount Ararat is 17,000 feet in elevation. Let that sink in. The boat floated over the top of Mount Ararat. So it was at least 15 cubits above, the water was at least 15 cubits above Mount Ararat. That's no local flood. That can't possibly be a local flood. There are those who are skeptics who say, well, what really happened was, they have no proof, but what really happened was the Tigris and the Euphrates, where they come together going down towards the ocean, they overflooded and it formed a large lake, but it wasn't very deep, it was kind of shallow. Huh. Maybe it did, but that's not what this is talking about. The flood. Notice in verse...
Put that in increment. If you use a 22-inch cube, it'd be 27.5 feet.
There you go.
Over Mount Ararat.
27.5 feet over the top of 17,000. Yeah, and all the mountains were covered. Yeah, that's a pretty deep pool. Sir?
That one right here at the Bible, specifically says, it proves that it's worldwide, it says all the high hills that were under the whole heaven.
Yes.
Now, the earth was a sphere or a globe. You where you stand, you stand on the North Pole, South Pole, equator, look up, the heaven is above.
Yeah.
So he covers the whole earth.
The whole earth. It was a global flood, not just a little local thing between the Tigris and the Euphrates River. And here's another reason why it was global. Verse 21, all flesh died. The end of verse 21, every man. Verse 22, all in whose nostrils the breath of life of all that was in the dry land died. Verse 23, every living substance. If it was a local flood, why bother building an ark in the first place? Why spend 120 years? Why did God tell Noah, build this ark? It's going to take you 120 years to build this ark. You're going to labor, you're going to preach during this whole time frame. If it was going to be a local flood, move away. Go from wherever you're living, go to California, move to Alaska, so go someplace else. Why did they have to build an ark even in the first place? Because God knew it was going to be a global flood. Also, what we find out, and we're going to get into a little bit of chapter 8. I'm going to get a little ahead of myself, which will probably mess up my notes. Think about this. I have at home on my shelf, I have a rock about so big, about that size. It's about that thick. And it is an ancient critter. I don't know what it is. Brother Richard, it's circular. It's kind of round. It's a shell of some kind. It's a marine being. It's an invertebrate. It's a marine being, and it's now a fossil. Where do fossils come from? You ever think about that? Fossils come from sediment, sedimentary rock. Sedimentary rock means rock that was sediment. We all know what sediment is. Go out to Lake Lanier, move around in the shallows, and you'll find out real quick what sediment is. It goes up all over the place. It's milky and whatever. Sediment. It rained like crazy. The fountains of the deep came up and swirled up everything. And the dirt that was on the ground became sediment. It was dirt and rock and whatever else floating around in this massive bed of water. A lot of people think about the flood as being just kind of a raising of the water, but it was turbulent. It was very, very fast-moving water. You ever been on a boat in a storm? I've been on a boat in a storm. When I was young, my father took me out on Lake St. Clair, which is one of the attachments to the Great Lake in Michigan. We were in a 23-foot boat. We got caught in a storm. Wooden boat, heavy boat. Caught in a storm. We had to put up the curtains, you know, the side curtains in the backdrop. Waves went over the top of the boat several times. Scared, you wouldn't believe how frightening that was. Here is a global, a worldwide flood with turbulence happening all over the place, turning up not only the waters, but the earth that's underneath and forming sediment. Moving water carries sediment. That water that carries sediment also is very powerful erosively. If you go to, if I believe I'm not mistaken, it's West Virginia. If you go to West Virginia, Ron would know. If you go to West Virginia, you'll find out that they do mining there. And in other parts of the world, they do mining. And they do what's called hydraulic mining. And what they have is they have something that looks like a huge nozzle to a hose. And in that nozzle, what they do is they spray water out on solid rock and cut through that rock, and they mine. They're looking for coal or whatever they're looking for. They cut away the rock with a big, powerful hose. That water is not just water, it's water with sediment in it. It's like very abrasive sandpaper if it's under pressure. That water caused all kind of erosion, caused all kind of things to happen, churned up all the sediment, and stuff died. The definition of fossils is billions of living things that died, that are laid down by sediment, which was caused by moving water. That's what a fossil is. I've got one sitting at home. Brother Richard, I don't know, but it could be from Noah's flood. Sitting on my shelf. There are scientists that say, oh, well, it was not a turbulent, nasty flood. It was a slow-moving thing. You see, those that believe in evolution have some requirements. In order to support their theory, it's got to be a long, long, long time. It's got to be ages, millions of years is what they say. It has to be a long time. And oh, by the way, not only does it have to be millions of years, but everything has to remain the same. Nothing changes. It's what you see today is what you saw a bazillion years ago. Nothing has changed since then. They can't take into consideration a flood because a flood's a catastrophe. And it's something that was sent by God, and it was sent by God as judgment upon sinful man. They sure don't want to hear that. And so, that's what we see. We see a fight here between those who believe in evolution and those who believe in what's called uniformity, or uniformitarianism, which is a big word that means the same thing. And they can't handle a flood. Not a global flood. They can't handle that. Sedimentary rock, let's get back to that. Interestingly enough, sedimentary rock is found all over the world. Not just in Hebrew land, not just in the Middle East, but sedimentary rock is found all over the place. If you go out to, I believe it's Montana, out in that area, in the Dakotas, you will find out that there are huge beds of fossils that are laid down in the earth where all kind of animals have died suddenly. Sedimentary rock. You see, something dies when it becomes a fossil. It dies, it gets covered up with sediment. That sediment builds and builds and builds and builds and builds, and as it builds and builds and builds, it creates pressure. Think about it. You're under the ground and somebody keeps pouring more and more dirt on top of you. It's pressure, is it not? And that pressure comes down, and inside that water that's swirling around is this cementation type of a chemical that helps that rock not only to press down, but to solidify. That's how fossils are formed. Interestingly enough, throughout the entire world, you'll find fossils. All over the place. Usually found in areas that are kind of remote. I mean, not likely you're going to go out in the front yard of the church here and dig down and find a fossil. But they are found in Georgia. They're found in other places. And these fossils are indications of things that died suddenly. I've got one, I told you, it's a marine invertebrate. Marine means water, does it not? This critter lived in water, and yet it died suddenly. It was buried quickly. It turned into rock. There are those that say, oh, well, that's not how it happened. What really happened was that things died, and then over the years what happened is the body decayed, and then it became covered with a little bit of dust, a little bit of dirt here and there, and over the years it piled up and piled up. Millions of years later, it had lots of dirt upon it, and it turned into a fossil. That's a nice theory, but the problem is it's wrong. And I'll tell you why it's wrong. I had a fossil before. I don't know what happened to it. I think I sold it. I had a fossil before that I purchased, and it was of a fish. About that big. Fish was about that big. You could see the outline of the fish's flesh. Now go out to Lake Lanier, catch yourself a fish, stick him down on your back porch someplace, and wait for the wind and the dust and stuff to cover him. And tell me what you see in the impression that's left over. You won't see the flesh. The flesh will rot away, will it not? But there are fossils that show the outline of flesh. There are fossils that show the outline of feathers. There are fossils that show the outline of leaves or of fronds, of ferns. Had to be laid down quickly, deposited quickly. This wasn't some long-term millions of years flood. It was a quick flood. It happened quickly. We're going to find out in chapter 8 that the flood lasted 371 days or 53 weeks. By the way, that goes to what Brother Troy was saying. If you do a chronology by reading chapters 6, 7, and 8, and 9, you'll find out that the months were 30-day months. Why is that important? Daniel chapter, I think it's 9 or 10, talks about the 70 weeks of Daniel. And they had to be 30-day months in order to come out right. And they were indeed 30-day months. Everything is based upon this calendar that comes from the book of Genesis. That's where we're at in Genesis 7 and Genesis 8.
Also, a year of 360.
Correct. Yeah, and that makes a whole lot of difference when you're talking about 483 years, as it says in Daniel. Big difference. Okay. I don't even know where I'm at. Oh. Verse 24 talks about the waters prevailed for 150 days. Or it doesn't say 150 days. Yeah, it says 150 days. That's 5 months of water rising. 5 months of water rising. Can't be a local flood. Can't possibly be a local flood. Okay.
Well, you have another thing there too, talk about the pressure. The oceans are so deep in places, man can't go down there, it will crush.
Right. Yeah.
That's how much pressure it's talking about.
Exactly. Chapter 8. And God remembered Noah and every living thing and all the cattle that was with him in the ark. And God made a wind to pass over the earth, and the waters assuaged. God remembered Noah. God didn't forget. God didn't forget Noah. He ain't going to forget you either. He's going to remember. This is a Hebrewism or a Hebrew saying, which means basically that he began to act on the behalf of Noah. He had been acting on the behalf of Noah all along, but Noah hadn't seen it. He's in a boat. God, remember this. He's locked up in a boat with only his family and a bunch of animals, and he's sitting there, and he's there for months. 5 months of not seeing anybody but your kids. Right? If I had to see my daughter for 5 months, I don't think I could handle it. It'd be pretty tough. 5 months. God remembered Noah. It's interesting to me that God's promise to Noah was that he told him, first of all, to come into the ark. He said, come into the ark, and then he tells him a little later on in this chapter, go out from the ark. Come into the ark. Come unto me, all ye that are burdened and heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Come. It's an invitation. God's giving an invitation, had given an invitation to Noah and his family. They're in the ark, and they're going to come out of the ark, and he's going to tell them, go. Kind of reminiscent of go ye into all the world and preach the gospel to every living creature. God's man was invited. God's man was told what to do, was directed. Verse 2 of chapter 8. Let's go back to verse 1. God remembered Noah, everything and every living thing, and all the cattle that was with him in the ark, and God made a wind to pass over the earth. The fountains also of the deep and the windows of heaven were stopped, and the rain from heaven was restrained. 5 months it's been raining. 5 months the water's been coming up. 5 months of this, I mean, to me it would get old real quick. After about 3 or 4 months, I'd be real tired of it. Okay? And God says in His Word here that He made a wind to pass over the earth. Go to Genesis 1:2 and somebody read to me what it says.
And the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep. The Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters.
The Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. What do we see here? God made the wind to pass over the earth. The word wind and the word spirit are the same word in Hebrew. What it means is, in its fundamental, ultimate meaning, is an invisible force, whether it be breath or wind. But the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters, and here we see the same thing coming again. And the waters assuaged, or they went down. The fountains of the deep, all that bubbling up from below, stopped. The windows of heaven stopped. And that must have been a major event for rejoicing for those that were in the ark, I would think. Even the animals were probably partying at that time. Verse 3, and the waters returned from the earth, returned from off the earth continually. And after the end of 150 days, the waters were abated. And the ark rested in the 7th month, on the 17th day of the month, upon the mountains of Ararat. Notice how specific God is here. He was specific when He talked about the flood coming in Noah's 600th year. If I'm not mistaken, the 17th day of the 1st month or 2nd month or whatever it was. God had a specific date for the start of the flood. He has a specific date for when the ark stops or lands upon the top of Mount Ararat. Now, they'd been floating around for a long time, and this heavy, heavy boat has settled upon the top of this mountain. Verse 5, the waters decreased continually until the 10th month. In the 10th month, on the 1st day of the month, were the tops of the mountains seen. You have to understand a little bit about the topology of where Mount Ararat is at. It is in an area we call Armenia. By the way, the word Ararat is the Hebrew version of the word Armenia in Greek. Armenia is the Greek word. Ararat is the Hebrew word. So it's in that area. Okay? The waters decrease. If you look at the area, Mount Ararat is 17,000 feet high, is what I said before. But there's nothing around it that's anywhere near the altitude of Mount Ararat. There are other mountains, but certainly not 17,000 feet in height. Okay? So they waited until the 1st day of the month here in verse 5. After 10 months, the tops of the mountains were seen. The water's running off. Okay? We would call it runoff, but major runoff. And it came to pass at the end of 40 days that Noah opened the windows of the ark which he had made, and sent forth a raven which went to and fro until the waters were dried up from upon the earth. What do you know about ravens? Scavengers, yeah, like big crows, you know, ravens. Ravens are scavengers. Scavengers can, because they're scavengers, they eat all kind of nasty things, all right? They eat whatever is available. And that raven could fly hither and yon and not come back because it could certainly find something to eat someplace. The dove, we're going to find out, is a different story. The dove is a little bit more delicate of a bird. And when they send the dove out, the dove goes out, can't find any rest for its feet, comes back home again, lands and rests. I think I like a homing pigeon, you know, going out and coming back. We know the story. A little bit later on, the dove's sent out again. Dove goes out this time, comes back with an olive branch or an olive leaf in its beak, which indicates the waters have gone down enough for vegetation to start back up again. But the dove still comes back home. The last time, Noah sends him out, and the dove doesn't return. It's found a home. He's testing. You know, Noah was an old guy, right? That was like a long, long time ago. They weren't very smart back then. I think they were pretty smart. How else would you do that? How else would you know whether the waters were deep enough? They didn't have sonar back then, okay? So how else would you know? Skeptics drive me crazy. Verse 8, we talk about the dove, Verse 9 talked about the dove. Oh, verse 9. The dove found no rest for the sole of her feet, and she returned unto him in the ark, for the waters were upon the face of the whole earth. Then he put forth his hand and took her and pulled her into the ark. Another reference to water upon the face of the whole earth. Wasn't just a local flood, wasn't just a regional flood. And he stayed another 7 days and sent forth the ark. There's 7-day periods between each one of these sendings of the dove out. It takes some time. He rests between time frame. Okay. Verse 13. And it came to pass in the 601st year, in the first month, in the first day of the month, the waters were dried up from off the earth. A specific date. The flood had ended. He gives a specific date for the flood to have started. He gives a specific date for the flood had ended. And Noah removed the covering of the ark and looked, and behold, the whole face of the ground was dry. Noah, can you picture this? Can you just see this? You've been in a boat for over a year. You want to get out. You want to get back on dry land again. And I can just see him opening the door, pushing that door open and peeking around out. What's it like out there? And what would it have been like? Think about it. The flood had come in and had washed away everything. Killed all the trees, killed all the plants. Had been turbulent moving water, so it was erosive. I mean, what a scene he would have had to look out there. It must have been really interesting. I think it was still soggy ground because of this. And it came to pass in the 601st year, verse 13. It came to pass in the 601st year of the first month, the first day of the month, the waters were dried up upon the earth, and Noah removed the covering of the ark and looked, and behold, the face of the ground was dry. And in the second month, on the 7th and 20th day of the month, was the earth dried. He waited a while longer just to make sure that everything was right. Listen to this, verse 15. And God spake unto Noah, saying, Go forth of the ark, thou and thy wife and thy sons wives with thee. God told them when to go in. God told them when to go out. They were directed of God. They didn't take matters into their own hands. They didn't say, Brother Troy, they didn't say, oh, well, I think it's time to go. They waited on God. Bring forth with thee every living thing that is with thee of all flesh, both of cattle, both of fowl and cattle, and every creeping thing that creepeth upon the earth, that they may breed abundantly in the earth, and be fruitful and multiply. And Noah went forth, and his sons and his wife, and his sons' wives with him. Every beast, every creeping thing, every fowl, and whatsoever creepeth upon the earth after their kinds, went forth out of the ark. And Noah builded an altar unto the Lord, and took of every clean beast and of every clean fowl, and offered burnt offerings on the altar. And the Lord smelled a sweet savor. And the Lord said in his heart, I will not again curse the ground any more for man's sake, for the imagination of man's heart is evil from his youth. Neither will I again smite any more the whole living as I have done, while the earth remaineth, seed time and harvest, cold and heat, and summer and winter, and day and night will not cease. God's promise. I find it very interesting. He tells them to go out forth, take all the animals with them. They take them all out. Remember, the animals were in twos, right? Male and female. Except there was something called clean animals, although the Bible up to this point doesn't say what a clean animal is. I have to assume that they were animals that would be considered clean later on when Moses' law, dietary laws were taken into place. And there were 7s of those. 7s. I believe they were domesticatable animals, like sheep, like goats, like cows. You know, that type of thing. There were 7s. 3 pair plus 1 oddball, right? 3 pair. Why would there be 3 pair? I said this last week. most likely they were 3 pair because 3 pair would breed a whole lot faster than 1 pair. By the way, Noah had how many kids? 3. And they each had wives. So we have 3 men, 3 families of men multiplying. Did it not say abundantly? So multiply, grow abundantly. So I believe he sent out all these animals, 3 pair of the clean animals. And what did he do with the one that was left over? Noah built it himself an altar. They were sacrificed, yeah. Sacrificed unto God. And God smelled it as a sweet savor. God smelled it as the sweet savor of thankfulness, of gratefulness. You see, if you think about it, Noah's breeding stock, he gave 1/7 of his breeding stock as an offering to God Almighty. Thank you, God, for protecting us. Thank you for taking us through this storm, through this catastrophe. Thank you for helping us through this time frame. You know, I don't know about you, but I think about when I hear about this whole situation, I think about what's coming. There's going to be a worldwide catastrophe coming, just like there was back then. This old earth is going to be pretty much wiped out with wars and all kind of plagues and all kind of things. Read the book of Revelation and you'll get an eyeful pretty quick. And just as happened in the days of Noah, so also I believe will happen in the days of Revelation. You see, a few were taken out by God ahead of time to ride safely above all this turmoil what's going on below. I got to believe that that's going to be what God's talking about in the book of Revelation. A few will be taken out before the rains fall, before all the cataclysm happens on earth, before judgment. There was judgment back in the days of Noah. There will be judgment coming for sure. And the interesting thing to me, verse 21, God smelled a sweet savor. The Lord said in his heart, I will not again curse the ground anymore for man's sake, for the imagination of his heart is only evil from his youth. Neither will again I smite every living thing as I have done. Can you imagine what great comfort that would be to Noah and his family? They'd just been taken through 371 days of being locked up in this dirty, stinky old boat, because it would be by this time. Okay? And God says, go out from the ark. They build an altar saying thanks, pray. They're worshiping God. And he says, I'm not going to do this again. I'm not going to cause a flood to come again and wipe out the earth. As long as the earth shall live, as a verse that I can't remember exactly where it's at. I've got it in my notes. God's not going to cause it to flood again. Not a worldwide flood. He's going to burn it up next time. Read 2 Peter chapter 3, if I'm not mistaken. Aren't you glad that God saw fit that Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord? Because from Noah, believe it or not, we're all kinfolk. We all come from Noah, one way or the other. Either you're from Shem or Japheth or Ham, one way or the other. They all 3 were from Noah, so y'all are from Noah.
Let me point out something about the 3 sons. Parallels come over into the New Testament. You go to Acts chapter 8, 9, and 10. You have Ham, you have Shem, and Japheth. Remarkable conversions. And go back to Ham, and also was Ethiopian. Chapter 8, go back to Ethiopia. And then you go to chapter 9, Paul a Jew, Shem, and go to chapter 10, Cornelius, and Gentile. And so it spills over. I mean, some were revivals. You go back in chapter 1 through 7, the book of Acts, it was on Jewish territory.
Mm-hmm.
And they was all back over in Matthew chapter 3, they killed John the Baptist. That was the first time they rejected him. And then we went to chapter 4, you find Christ preached the same message, they killed him. Second time they rejected the kingdom. You get out of chapter 7, they rejected it for the last time.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so all this spills over. I mean, you just follow it
Yeah.
down through the scripture. Three remarkable conversions. Chapter 8, Ethiopian. Chapter 9, Paul, a Jew, Sheila. And Japheth, Cornelius in chapter 2.
Mm-hmm.
It's all there.
Amen.
Like he was teaching me ago, he's talking about all the false stuff going out. As a young Christian, I went to Baptist bookstore down on Peach Street in Atlanta and bought a book. Boy, they led me astray. I was a young Christian.
Yeah.
And that book, in the Baptist bookstore, said that was just local flooding.
Right.
I was a little weak and Christian. I didn't know better. I just accepted it for a while. I learned better. Y'all forget how to do repent over it.
I have a book at home that I'm taking a lot of my material from. It's called The Genesis Record. It's by Henry Morris and somebody else, I can't remember his name, but Henry Morris is the main author here. And it talks in this book, there's an appendices, there's an appendix. I think it's appendix number 5. It gives 100 reasons why the flood was not local, why the flood was global in nature. The majority of those reasons are in the book of Genesis. A somewhat lesser number are in the rest of the Bible. And at the end, there's a bunch of evidences that are non-biblical. Here's one that I can think of. If you look throughout the world, you will find out that there is a flood tradition all over the place. South America, China, India, Europe. There's a flood tradition in most of the major people groups throughout the world. One other evidence. What happened to the dinosaurs? Anybody got an idea? Oh, a big comet fell on the earth and splattered on the earth and caused the temperatures to change, and that big comet. There's no evidence of that comet, that meteor, anywhere. They died suddenly. Now, how would a dinosaur die suddenly? It's a cold-blooded animal. Evidently, it got cold. Why would it get cold? The water vapor canopy had disappeared. It got to be cold around the poles. Afterwards, there's something called an ice age happened. Bible's true. God's word is infallible. It can be taken for what it says. What these scientists have to say, they don't know what they're talking about 3/4 of the time.
Why would we want to believe what a scientist tells us will happen in the future when they only know what happened in the past instead of living in the future?
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. Yeah. No, they won't believe the truth. They prefer to believe a lie because it suits their pet rabbit.
I got a great grandson in college and his professor, Uncle Likas, he went on a trip to do all that digging research, and they dug up a dinosaur.
Yeah.
They get all the way up out to the brush, a little time, but they found living dinosaurs.
Yeah. Yeah, we have, at home, we have some pieces of amber. Y'all know what amber is? It's basically tree sap or some kind of sap that froze solid, became rock. We have some with bugs in it. Frozen solid in the rock, not decayed. Died rapidly, quickly. The flood happened in a year. It didn't take millions and millions of years of dust and dirt accumulating. Thanks for coming.